The millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. She arrived like a diva, and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. The grand ballroom of the Whitaker estate in the heart of Bel Air erupted with malicious laughter as Eleanor Whitaker descended the marble staircase wearing a gown worth more than what most of the guests earned in an entire year. But it wasn't the laughter of admiration. It was the sound of polished cruelty. "Well, look who decided to show up," Preston Whitaker whispered smugly to his circle of elite guests, raising his glass of vintage Cristal. At 34, Eleanor Turner never imagined she would set foot in that hall as a guest, not even as a joke. For nearly 2 years, she had scrubbed every tile of that house, polished every inch of floor, always invisible, always quiet, listening as these wealthy elites showered each other with empty compliments while treating her like background noise. 3 days before, the invitation had arrived, gold-embossed, perfumed, and handed to her with that mocking smirk she had come to recognize too well. "Charity Gala this Saturday," Preston said, slipping her the envelope with an exaggerated flourish. "Dress code. Absolute elegance. I'm sure you've got something appropriate in your closet, right?" The laughter of his companions echoed like champagne corks popping in the corridor. It wasn't an invitation, it was bait. A trap designed to humiliate her publicly, to remind her of her place in front of California's high society. He had even invited a gossip columnist from a celebrity blog to capture what he described as a humbling, teachable moment. "Let's make it interesting," Preston had told his wife Camille, while Eleanor vacuumed just a day earlier. "50 grand says she doesn't show, and if she does, she'll be gone in 15 minutes, Camille giggled, swirling her wine. "You're evil," she said. "She'll probably come in something borrowed and wilt the second she walks in. It'll be delicious." But Preston Whitaker didn't know two vital things about Eleanor Turner. First, she hadn't always been on the cleaning staff. She had once lived in homes like that long before life tore everything away. Second, not every storm is meant to drown you. Some teach you to move with the rain. As she entered the room beneath a ceiling of chandeliers and stairs sharper than diamonds, Eleanor walked like she belonged there, with her chin high and a gaze unreadable, like a woman carrying truths that could dismantle that entire empire with a whisper. Each step she took was measured, graceful, deliberate, like a performance rehearsed over years of survival. "Oh my God, she actually came," murmured Vanessa Pierce, the wife of a congressman, leaning into her friend's ear. "And that dress. Where did she even get that?" "Probably rented it," snorted Meredith Lang, daughter of a media mogul. "She'll be paying it off for a year." But none of them knew the truth, that Eleanor hadn't borrowed or bought the dress. She had retrieved it. From a life they had no idea she had lived. A life Preston Whitaker would have done anything to erase had he known it ever existed. He approached her with puffed-up pride, buoyed by the laughter of billionaires and the safety of power. "Eleanor, what a surprise," he said with fake charm. "I always knew you'd come. After all, when someone like you gets invited to something like this—" "Someone like me?" she interrupted, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the marble air. "Go ahead, Preston. Finish your sentence." For a brief, nearly imperceptible moment, something in her tone made him pause. There was weight in her presence that didn't match the woman he thought he'd mocked into silence. But arrogance is a stubborn disease, and his had only just begun to fail him. "Well, you know someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling quite intimidated by all this elegance." Eleanor smiled, not the nervous or submissive kind, but a dangerously serene expression that instantly silenced the giggles around her like a sudden drop in temperature. "Intimidated," she echoed, her eyes locking with Preston's in a way that made him take an unconscious step back. "No, Preston. I feel exactly where I've always belonged." The silence that followed lasted mere seconds, but it cracked the entire atmosphere of the evening. Something about the way Eleanor spoke, the way she held her head high and moved through that space, completely dismantled every assumption those people had built about her. Preston cleared his throat, desperate to claw back control. "Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. I'm sure it'll be educational for you." "Oh, I'm certain it'll be educational for all of us," Eleanor replied coolly, her eyes sweeping across the cluster of guests like a silent ledger being filled. If you're enjoying this story of twists and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what those elites didn't know was that Eleanor Turner carried a truth so explosive it would flip this night of premeditated humiliation into the most brutal social reckoning Bel Air had ever seen. Preston was enjoying himself far more than expected. Eleanor hadn't fled in shame like he predicted. Instead, she stood with that disturbingly calm posture that was beginning to irritate him in ways he couldn't explain. "Everyone," he called out, tapping his spoon against a crystal glass. "May I have your attention? I'd like to introduce our guest of honor this evening, Eleanor Turner, our hard-working housekeeper." The laughter that followed wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated, a wave of perfectly timed cruelty crashing through the room. Camera flashes popped as influencers and heirs snapped pictures, ready to upload them with cutting captions before dessert was even served. "Preston," Camille murmured beside him, pretending to be concerned. "Don't you think this is a little much?" "Cruel," Preston replied, laughing loud enough to draw more attention. "I'm offering her the experience of a lifetime. When would someone like her ever attend a gala like this again?" Eleanor stood still in the middle of the room, every eye locked on her. But instead of the flushed embarrassment they had hoped for, what they saw in her face unnerved them. A calm so deep it looked like it had been forged in decades of buried storms. Vanessa Pierce stepped forward, flanked by a group of women with polished smiles sharper than knives. "Eleanor, darling, how long did it take to choose that dress? Must have been tough finding something decent." "Actually," Eleanor replied with such calm that Vanessa blinked, "this dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother." "Your mother?" Meredith Lang scoffed through her nose. "What, she found it at a designer thrift store?" Eleanor's smile sharpened just slightly. My mother wore this the last time she was in a ballroom just like this one. That was 2 decades ago. Back when she was still Eleanor Turner Whitaker." The silence dropped like a guillotine. Conversations died. Glasses froze mid-air. A few people began to realize they were witnessing something far bigger than a cruel party stunt. Preston, who had been mid-joke with 2 Wall Street executives, turned slowly. "What did you say?" "Turner Whitaker," she repeated, her voice like velvet wrapped around a dagger. Funny how some people develop selective amnesia about their family roots. Preston's face drained of color. Camille grabbed his wrist, sensing the air shift violently. "You're delusional," he said, but the quiver in his tone betrayed him. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling." "This isn't a stunt, Preston," Eleanor said quietly, but with the weight of truth that bends rooms. "This is me, reminding you that no matter how much money you've stacked over the ruins of the past, the truth doesn't stay buried forever." Eleanor took a step toward him, and several guests instinctively backed away. "It's history, our history. The history you tried to erase when you decided it was more convenient to pretend certain people in our family never existed." The phones kept recording, but now for an entirely different reason. The energy in the room had shifted completely, and hushed whispers began to spread like wildfire through the marble hall. Camille yanked Preston's arm, her voice low and urgent. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying," Preston snapped, but his voice lacked conviction, and his hands had started to tremble. "Just a crazy employee desperate for attention." But Eleanor reached into her small clutch and pulled out an object that drew audible gasps. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was the original Whitaker family engagement ring, set with its unmistakable deep sapphire and engraved with the family crest. "This ring," Eleanor said, holding it in the light for all to see, "was given to my mother by her father, Harrison Whitaker, my grandfather, the same man you told your children died without heirs." Preston's face went pale. "Where did you get that? How dare you steal?" "Steal?" Eleanor laughed, but the sound was sharp and cold. "Preston, you can't steal what is yours by blood." Patricia Pierce, who had been frozen with wide eyes, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Do you think she's telling the truth?" "That's impossible," Meredith Lang replied, but her voice now wavered. "Preston would have told us if he had a cousin." Eleanor heard her and turned her head slowly. "Cousin," she said. "No, darling, I'm not his cousin." She turned back to Preston, eyes locked. "I'm his half-sister." The ballroom erupted in a wave of murmurs and gasps. Preston looked like he'd been struck in the chest. "This is insane," he shouted, but his voice cracked under the weight of it. "My father would never— You're making this up!" "Harrison Whitaker had a long affair with my mother, Isabel Turner," Eleanor said, with the calm fury of someone who had waited her whole life for this moment. "She was the family's piano instructor. They were together for nearly 6 years. When she became pregnant with me, your father promised to care for us. And he did, right up until the day he died." Camille's hand covered her mouth. She stared at the two of them like watching a car crash she couldn't look away from. "And you," Eleanor said, pointing at Preston like a final verdict. "You decided it was easier to pretend we didn't exist. You cut off the financial support your father left us, sold the home he bought for my mother, and left us destitute while you inherited everything." I had no legal obligation, Preston began, but Eleanor cut him off. No obligation to your father's daughter. How convenient, especially since you walked away with every cent of a fortune that was supposed to be shared. The weight of her words was beginning to register. Some guests slowly inched away from Preston, as if his scandal were contagious. Prove it, he said in a strained voice. Anyone can invent a story and buy a ring. Eleanor's smile sharpened, something dangerous lurking beneath. Oh, Preston, do you really think I'd come here without proof? She tapped her phone, then gestured toward the entrance. They can come in now. The anticipation snapped the room's tension like a wire pulled too tight. Preston didn't know it yet, but every layer of humiliation only added fuel to the quiet fire in Eleanor's chest, a fire he had lit the moment he tried to erase her from her own family's legacy. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing her own sentence, and Eleanor Thames had spent 20 years learning exactly how to collect every penny of a debt that transcended money. At that precise moment, 3 people entered the ballroom, and their arrival would forever alter the lives of everyone in that room. First came Rachel Morrison, one of Los Angeles' most respected investigative journalists. Then came Thomas Lee, a formidable attorney specializing in estate and inheritance law. But it was the third person who made Preston Whitaker stagger like he'd been punched. Dr. Halverson, Camille whispered, stunned as she recognized the family's longtime private physician. What are you doing here? The doctor, who had overseen Harrison Whitaker's care during the final months of his life, stepped into the center of the crowd. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. 20 years ago, I was pressured into signing a false death certificate. Harrison Whitaker didn't die of heart failure. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over several months. A wave of horrified gasps filled the hall. Rachel Morrison raised a hand firmly. Please put your phones away. This is an official, on-the-record confession for legal purposes. Preston was now visibly unraveling, sweat beading on his forehead. You've lost your mind, Halverson, he snapped. My father had heart disease. But the doctor didn't blink. Your father discovered the financial fraud you'd been committing through the company's offshore accounts. He updated his will to include Eleanor and intended to file a police report. That's when the symptoms began. Eleanor stood silently, tears rising, but this time, they were the tears of vindication. After 2 decades, someone was finally telling the truth. Thomas Lee stepped forward, opening his briefcase. This blood sample was independently tested last week. The arsenic levels confirmed a slow, deliberate poisoning. You're fabricating this, Preston shouted, voice cracked and wild. It's a setup, an orchestrated lie. Rachel Morrison calmly pulled out a folder. Mr. Whitaker, I have recordings of 5 conversations between you and Dr. Halverson from 2004. In them, you threatened to destroy his career unless he kept quiet. At last, Eleanor spoke, and her voice sliced through the panic like a sharpened blade. You didn't just kill our father, Preston. You robbed me of 2 decades of justice. I didn't kill anyone, he yelled, pointing in every direction. You're all lying. Then explain this, Eleanor said, connecting her phone to the mansion's speaker system. The audio crackled to life. Preston's voice, unmistakable. Halverson, you keep your mouth shut about anything weird you found in the old man's blood. Say one word and you'll never practice again. As for that woman and her bastard kid, they're on their own. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the most loyal guests turned away, suddenly ashamed to be standing near him. Camille stared at her husband like she was looking at a stranger. Preston, is this true? You actually did this? 20 years, Eleanor screamed, her mask breaking for just a moment. 20 years cleaning the blood of the man you murdered. She inhaled, then let her fury settle into ice. You want to know how I got all this evidence? I didn't end up working here by chance. I applied for the job on purpose. I spent 2 years documenting everything, every file, every drawer, every word. Preston scrambled for an escape. Even if it's all true, it doesn't matter. The estate was settled years ago. The money's gone. The will is history. Thomas Lee smiled for the first time. Actually, Mr. Whitaker, when there is evidence of homicide, all assets may be legally reallocated according to the original testament, and we happen to have a certified copy of Harrison Whitaker's real will. Eleanor stepped closer to Preston, who was now leaning against the wall like a wounded animal. Do you know what my biggest mistake was, Preston? She said quietly, believing you were capable of changing on your own. Please, he whispered, all that trademark arrogance now completely drained from his face. Camille, the kids, this will destroy everything. No, Eleanor replied, her voice steady. You destroyed this family the moment you chose greed over justice. Preston collapsed into a nearby chair, his body heavy with defeat. The transformation from smug patriarch to disgraced criminal had taken barely 90 minutes. Eleanor glanced at him one last time. He looked hollow. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. What Preston didn't yet know, and would soon find out in the most devastating way possible, was that Eleanor had spent years gathering proof, not only about their father's death, but also the financial crimes, extortion, and systemic corruption Preston had orchestrated over decades. She had built a case so precise, so airtight, that his fall from grace would be total. The next 2 hours turned what had started as the most exclusive gala in Bel Air into the most shocking live scandal high society had ever witnessed. Preston now sat on the ballroom floor, back against the wall, watching in real time as his legacy unraveled. Rachel Morrison had connected her laptop to the estate's projection system, and one by one, files, images, statements, and audio clips began flashing across a towering screen. Here is a wire transfer of $185,000 from Preston Whitaker's personal account to Dr. Halverson, dated 3 days after Harrison's death, she narrated calmly. And the memo on the transfer reads, "Silence is worth every cent." Camille, now across the room as far from Preston as she could manage, stood silently, tears streaking down her cheeks, as 20 years of betrayal sank in. And here, Rachel continued, is a recording of Preston speaking with his CFO about how to mask the company's asset diversion. Preston's voice played over the sound system. I need you to make the book sing. If anyone finds out I've siphoned off $19 million over the past 4 years, I'm screwed. Blame it on inflation, new hires, whatever sounds good, Patricia Pierce whispered, horrified. He stole from his own shareholders. In the center of the room, Eleanor stood still, the calm in the middle of the storm, watching as every piece of truth shattered the illusion Preston had built. Thomas Lee approached with a new folder. Mr. Whitaker, he said, in addition to criminal charges, I must inform you that Ms. Turner is filing a $50 million civil lawsuit for wrongful death and inheritance fraud. $50 million? Preston croaked, his eyes empty. I don't have $50 million. No, Eleanor replied softly, but your company is valued at $120, and half of it has always belonged to me. Rachel continued, unfazed. We also have evidence Mr. Whitaker extorted at least 5 local officials, bribed 3 state judges, and redirected over $3 million in non-profit funds to private accounts. Each revelation triggered fresh waves of gasps from the guests. People who had once called Preston a friend now stepped away from him like he was toxic. Eleanor, Preston whispered, his voice ragged. Please, you've made your point. Stop this. She stepped forward and knelt in front of him, her eyes locked onto his shattered soul. You murdered our father. You stole my blood, my name, my legacy. You forced me to scrub your lies while smiling through grief. I can fix this, he whimpered. I'll make it right. There is no redemption for 2 decades of silence and cruelty, Eleanor replied with a haunting calm that silenced every breath in the room. Camille's phone rang. It was their oldest son calling from university. Mom, is it true? They're saying online that Dad's a murderer. She stared at Preston with a look of cold revulsion. Your own children are learning who you are from Twitter. Preston tried to rise, but his knees buckled under the weight of exposure. Camille, please, the kids, don't you dare say their names, she roared, halting the room with her fury. You've marked them with shame they'll carry for life. Dr. Halverson stepped forward, addressing Eleanor directly. Miss Turner, I've already notified authorities. Mr. Whitaker will be placed under arrest within the hour. For murder? Eleanor asked with clarity. And for corporate fraud, coercion, obstruction, and tax evasion, the doctor confirmed. He'll likely never see freedom again. Eleanor turned to the shocked, pale faces around her. Let this be clear. I didn't do this to humiliate him. I did this to expose the truth, for everyone who's ever been crushed beneath men like Preston Whitaker. Patricia Pierce stepped forward, visibly shaken. Eleanor, we're sorry. We didn't know. You knew enough to laugh at me, Eleanor said sharply. You knew enough to treat me like I was disposable. The only thing that changed is now I have more power than all of you. Sirens could now be heard approaching. The glow of red and blue flashed against the windows. Preston looked up at her one last time. You ruined everything. No, she replied with the weight of a soul finally unburdened. You ruined yourself. I just turned the lights on. As uniformed officers entered the estate to take Preston into custody, Eleanor walked out onto the balcony where the night air greeted her like a long-lost friend. Below, a sea of press had already gathered. Lights, cameras, microphones. The story had gone viral in under an hour. Camille followed her outside, quieter now. "Eleanor, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "I believe you," Eleanor replied gently. "He fooled everyone." "So, what now?" Camille asked. Eleanor looked down at the glowing city. Now justice finally breathes, and maybe, just maybe, this city will learn that dignity has nothing to do with a last name or a tax bracket. Preston was led through the very hall where he had once tried to reduce her to a joke, now with chains on his wrists and the entire world watching. And in that moment, Eleanor felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace. What Preston didn't know, as he entered the prison system he had once used his wealth to avoid, was that Eleanor had orchestrated every inch of his fall while rebuilding her own rise from the ground up. The Whittaker estate now had a new name, a new heir, and a new purpose: to defend the very people it used to exploit. 6 months later, Eleanor Turner Whittaker sat confidently behind the massive desk in what used to be Preston's office, now transformed. Gone were the shelves of golden plaques and pretentious awards. In their place were framed photos of community programs, former janitors now team leaders, and scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed. Preston had been sentenced to 25 years without parole, convicted on multiple counts including homicide, embezzlement, judicial bribery, and tax fraud. His assets had been liquidated to fund restitution. Eleanor had been one of many to suffer under his rule, but now she was leading the revolution in his name. "Ms. Turner Whittaker," said Amanda, her new executive assistant, once a maintenance worker in the very same building. "Forbes is here for your interview about the company's transformation." Eleanor stood and smiled, the kind of smile that only someone who had won a war without raising her voice could wear. In just half a year, she had increased the company's revenue by 42%, not through aggressive acquisitions or cost-cutting, but simply by treating her employees with humanity, fair pay, real advancement based on merit, and a culture of mutual respect, created a kind of loyalty and performance that Preston Whittaker's reign of fear had never achieved. Camille had filed for divorce and quietly relocated with the children to a different state. Before leaving, she met with Eleanor face to face. "You could have destroyed all of us," she said, her voice trembling, "but you protected my kids. I'll never forget that." Eleanor's response was simple. Children should never carry the weight of their parents' sins. They deserve the chance to become better people. Dr. Halverson now served as the company's medical advisor, providing free care for every employee. "I spent years too afraid to do what was right," he admitted during one meeting. "You showed me that dignity can be rediscovered." As for Patricia Pierce and Vivian Grant, they had attempted to reconnect with Eleanor in the weeks following the scandal, but she kept them at a courteous distance. "You laughed at me when I was just a worker. Now that I have a title and a balance sheet you respect, you want to be my friend. That tells me everything I need to know." Eleanor's journey had become a global story, shared by outlets and universities around the world, but she chose to avoid the spotlight. "I don't want to be celebrated for what I survived," she said in a rare interview. "I want to be recognized for what I created afterward." Under her leadership, the company launched scholarship programs for employee families, a microloan fund for underserved entrepreneurs, and the largest support network for domestic abuse victims in the state. One quiet afternoon, Eleanor received a letter from prison. It was from Preston. "Eleanor, I know I don't deserve an answer, but I needed to tell you that you were right. I became something monstrous. Every day I sit in this cell and try to understand how I turned into a man capable of murdering his own father over a fortune. The kids asked about you during their last visit. They want to meet the aunt who saved their family when their father failed them." She placed the letter in a drawer. Unread. Forgiveness was a private journey, and justice had already spoken. During her Forbes feature, the interviewer asked her, "Some critics say your retaliation was too severe. What would you say to them?" Eleanor didn't flinch. Revenge would have been sinking to his level. "Justice is ensuring that those who commit harm face consequences, and that no one else has to endure what I did. There's a profound difference." "And what would you say to others battling injustice?" the journalist asked. Eleanor glanced outside the window, where workers laughed and shared lunch in the garden she had restored, a place that now radiated respect. "The best revenge," she said thoughtfully, "is not ruining those who hurt you. It's building something so meaningful that your pain becomes just the first page in a legacy of strength." That evening, Eleanor returned not to a tiny apartment with peeling walls and quiet dreams, but to a warm home filled with light, where two orphaned girls waited at the kitchen table. She had adopted them the month before, children who, like her, only needed a second chance. As she helped them with homework, she thought of the father she never truly got to know. But in her heart, she knew, William Turner would be proud to see that his daughter had reclaimed everything stolen from her, and had transformed a dynasty built on arrogance into a living monument of justice, hope, and second chances. Eleanor's true triumph wasn't bringing Preston to justice. It was showing that real power, when built on integrity instead of intimidation, doesn't isolate. It elevates everyone around it. Preston tried to mock a cleaning woman, only to learn he had misjudged an heiress. But more than that, he learned a painful truth. Dignity is not something you can buy, inherit, or steal. It's earned in the quiet moments, through the decisions we make when no one is watching. If this story of justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove that when strategy meets heart, good always finds a way to win. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone chose to overlook.